All right.
Brought your charging cable, didn't you?
What different cable?
Oh,
The one that fits on the front.
perfect.
My old one.
I got you.
I try to get stuff together before I come, and this conference in particular is really awkward for me. Just things I'm forgetting. And
Little kids do it all the time. One little penis.
All right, let's come back in.
Oh,
and
he
get
developed the
started
field of
for
watermelon.
JoAnn.
yeah.
What's the newest thing?
Everybody ready? If we get started, the stragglers will come in behind.
But anyway, that's the newest craze. Craze.
Yeah.
You take them over and they have big grinders and they
Right.
compost
BMIX.
you. You want me to write that down?
I just did.
Let me double check.
All right.
That's
This
it.
is my good friend
.com.
JoAnn Durgin. Everybody give her a big round of applause. JoAnn and I sit together along with Cheryl, and Jim is her husband. Jim works for the Louisville Courier Journal. Yeah. And I always ask him on Sunday morning, what time do you get home? It's usually 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning. And then he comes and teaches our Sunday school class a lot of time. He's teaching this Sunday morning, last Sunday morning. Jim is a scholar as well, but I didn't ask him to come speak. I asked you, JoAnn, to come speak. Because JoAnn, unlike all of our other, Doug, you wouldn't call yourself a professional writer. You've never made a living at it.
You cannot make a living.
That's why I invited JoAnn.
Let me finish. You cannot make a living writing nonfiction.
Nonfiction, okay. Well, I'm sure JoAnn's going to tell us all about that. JoAnn is a Christian romance novel writer. She's my sister in the Lord as well. I love her. She can tell we give each other hugs all the time. And she's going to explain to you. I gave her, of course, you know I give you guys when you're speaking. Let's talk about this, let's talk about this. And then you get to isolate what you want to talk about. For some, I remember I've said, let's talk about this, and then you talk about whatever you want to. So that can happen too. We're all directed by the same Holy Spirit that lets us know what the Lord wants to lead us into. So JoAnn is going to speak to us with some of the comments and things. Should I stop talking now? So, all right, give her another round of applause.
I'm not used to using a microphone, so I have an outline. Would anybody like one? I have an outline. Jim, can I do that? Our son Matthew is here, but he's conveniently disappeared at the moment. So I'll just give you, there's quite a stack. So just follow along. I don't know if I'll hit every point. Dave, if you could kind of, where's Dave? If you could kind of give me the signal, I would like to have a short time of questions and answers at the end. So if anyone has any questions, and we'll stick around through lunch. So if anyone has any further questions, but as Dave said, my name is JoAnn Durgin. I live in New Albany, Indiana. I was born in New Albany, Indiana, but in between, I've been in several states. I've lived in a lot of places. I went to Ball State, and then I couldn't wait to get out of it. I was tired of stomping in the snow in Mud City. And what's funny is we ended up in Boston eventually. But I went to Dallas, Texas. That was the time, and this was back in the 80s. Remember the original Dallas TV show? It was all the rage, Who Shot JR, all that. I either was going to Atlanta or I was going to Dallas. I decided I want to go to Dallas, and that's where I met my husband, Jim. He was in seminary in Dallas. We actually met through a blind date, believe it or not. He had gone on a date with a runner-up to Miss Texas. Well, you know, Atlanta was, beautiful girls that usually plays the Miss America pageant, but he'd gone on a blind date with Miss Texas and the runner-up, and decided he didn't want to go on any more blind dates. But we had mutual friends. I knew the girl, he knew the guy that went to Dallas Seminary, and they prayed. They wanted to fix Jim up with somebody, and they wanted to fix me up with somebody. And so they went to individual, I guess they weren't married at the time, but they are now. They've been married for a long time, but they went to their homes, and they each individually prayed, who can we introduce Jim Durgin to? And who can we introduce? JoAnn Peel was my maiden name, like Banana Peel, E-E-E-L. So Durgin's a much better name. I'm glad when I started writing I had a married name. But they each came up with the two of us. So they put us together. We became friends, and long story short, we did marry, but there's a lot of story in it. My mother always said, you should write your own love story. That is the love story. And I said, well, I tell it a lot, or I mention it quite often, but the first book that I ever wrote is based on the characters of Jim and myself. It's our characters, but not literally. Sam's 6'5", Lexa is 5'3". He's dark-headed Sam, Lexa is blonde, but I'll get to that in a little bit. But my theme verse for my life and my writing is Matthew 5:16. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. And, okay, so of those here, who is published? Who either self-published or has a publisher? Raise your hand high so I can see. Okay, now, who has written nonfiction of you who've been published? Okay, and how about fiction? Great, once you great. Okay, that's good to know. What is the difference between a writer and an author? It's on the page right there. A writer is someone who writes, published or not, who may or may not own their own copyright. Now, as pastors, I think most of you are pastors. I'm sure you're writers. Like my husband Jim was a pastor for many, many years, and he wrote devotionals. I always said he's the writer in the family because he wrote the most beautiful devotionals and used to write them in our newsletters. But he's never had that desire, that passion, as you were talking about, Steve, to write full-time, or even part-time, really. But he works for a publishing company that publishes newspapers. An author, so a writer is someone who writes, published or not, and they may or may not own their copyright, but an author is the originator or creator of a work who has published their work and or been given credit for the writing. But a writer is more focused on the words, whereas an author is more focused on the images. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Let's see, I'm trying to see how much time I've got. If I get started on rabbit trails, that's where I get in trouble, because I like to tell the Lord has worked in my life in so many different ways to put me where I am right now in my writing ministry. And it started when I was, I'm not going to be like Ted Baxter, remember on the old Mary Tyler Moore show, he'd say, oh, Ted, I was born in a, on the radio station, the whole thing. But as I said, I was born in New Albany and went to Ball State. At Ball State, I graduated with journalism and English degrees. I learned the mechanics of writing. I learned how to structure a sentence, how to do a paragraph. It was more factual writing, but I did go into the creative aspect of it. And actually, my emphasis, as they called it at Ball State, was advertising. Well, advertising, they said, well, you know, you're really not going to get a good job because a lot of the kids coming out of the New York schools had the ability to illustrate or take photographs, that type of thing, as well as their copywriting ability, and that's what you really need in advertising. So I graduated from Ball State and went to Dallas, and I worked in the World Trade Center and worked for a magazine that put together the magazines for the people that came to the trade shows at the World Trade Center. But that didn't pay anything, so I got a part-time job, and then I finally ended up going to work for a big law firm, because at least law firms appreciated the fact that I could lawyers appreciated the fact that I could put together a sentence, be coherent, and I enjoyed I enjoyed the law. I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I actually liked being around it and learning about the law, and I found it fascinating, to tell you the truth. But anyway, that's where I met Jim, as I mentioned, was in Dallas. Now, Jim is from Newport, Rhode Island. Anybody been to Newport, Rhode Island? So here he was in Texas from Newport. My joke about Jim, he was born and raised on, you know how they have the Vanderbilt mansions and they have all the big mansions? Well, he said he lived on the other side of the street. And he did, literally. He lived on the same street as some of the big mansions, but way down the street. And my joke about that is that, remember Klaus von Bülow? He was accused of murdering his wife, and then he was accused of, I think, trying to murder her again or something with insulin. And he was found not guilty on a second appeal. Or he was found guilty and convicted. It was overturned, something like that. Well, Jim used to deliver groceries when he was in high school in Newport. He worked at the yacht club, but didn't you? You did work at the yacht club, right? But he also delivered groceries. He delivered to Doris Duke, right? She was the heir to the Phillips tobacco fortune. She was very eccentric. You may have heard about her. When she died, she left all of her fortune, vast fortune. She had no children. She had her dogs, and her butler. He also delivered groceries to Klaus von Bülow's house. Well, one day, Klaus von Bülow himself opened the door. This is a very well-known man. But I thought he was German-born or Austrian, but he was actually Danish-born and he lived in Britain. But he opened the door. He invited Jim, the grocery delivery boy in Newport, to come in and have ice cream with him. So that's my joke, is this man who's accused of killing his wife, and she was diabetic or whatever. But he had ice cream with Klaus von Bülow and lived to tell the tale. But anyway, I thought he was banished, but from the U.S., but I'm not sure where he is now. I think he's still living. But anyway, I need to keep moving here. But we lived in California. We met in Dallas. I'm just going to make this short, okay? I'm from Indiana, he's from Rhode Island. We met in Texas, married in Kentucky, we lived in California, had a first child, then we moved to Philadelphia, had 2 more children, and then we moved to Boston. And then we moved back home in late 2005. My home, good old Indiana. There's really no place like home. There really is not. But he's a New England boy, and in the New England churches, he was in the ministry. A lot of people knew it was either military or ministry, but they the Lord made it clear that he wanted us up in New England. And I tell you what, I never really cared about baseball in my entire life until we moved to Boston, and they won the World Series in 2004, and had to go through the Yankees to do it, and the whole town just got so involved in it. But every experience that I've had, everything that the Lord has done, where he's taken me, what I've experienced, just everything, it has just all brought me, as I said, to this point where I am today. There are so many things. There are a lot of writers who never leave their hometown. But I've been able to travel. I was able to travel. My mother was a very independent, avid traveler. And I was blessed to have been able to do a lot of traveling in BC, which is before children. And we have 3 children now. And just the experience I had in Europe, the experiences that I had everywhere that I've been, have just been wonderful and have really given me a good background for being able to write. I've set books in many different locations. Texas is one. I love living in Texas. Everything's big in Texas, right? But I love living in Texas, and so I have a long-running series called the Lewis Legacy series. And I started it. That was my first novel. And Steve, I can identify with a lot of what you said. I was the kid who read the books under the covers with the flashlight, and I think that writers need to be avid readers. I was always an avid reader. But I'm getting in the rabbit trails now. I'm so sorry. What was I saying?
Steve was right about publishing.
Yes, but what I did was when we moved to Indiana, I had not done, I'm so sorry, thank you. I'm a better writer than I am a speaker, trust me. But my dad always said that he was a much better writer than a speaker. Well, I'm the same way. But I did not pursue writing full-time. I worked for attorneys my whole life. I did not pursue writing full-time or even writing, period. I didn't grow up thinking I'm going to grow up to be a writer. I just love to write. So that's why I went to journalism school and got the journalism and English degrees. But when we moved back here in 2005, Christian romance really wasn't that big of a thing until about maybe 20 years ago. So we moved back here in 2005, and I started to read some of the Christian romances that were out there, and I told Jim, I said, I think I could write as well as this. I think I could do this. And so I prayed to the Lord. I said, okay, if this is, like again Steve said, if this is what you want me to do, then give me the desire, tell me not tell me what to do, but help me. And I need some help. Can you hear me? I think this did it go off? Can you hear me? No. Okay. Sorry.
Got one right there.
Oh, thank you. I had written, starting back in Philadelphia, when we lived there, I was a stay-at-home mom with 2 and then 3 small children, though. I had started to write. But basically, and I did send some of it off. This was back in the days where you had to actually print it out on the antiquated printers, and you had to package it up and send it off to publishers. So I did that a few times with my sample chapters and what they call a query letter. And I got enough of a response from the publishers that if I were smart enough to know, I would have realized that, okay, I'm doing okay. I've got something here, or else they wouldn't even respond to me. But that didn't even hit me, but I just kept going. But I never really actively pursued getting published at that time. And all I can tell you, and then we moved to Boston. I wrote what turned out to be my first novel. I wrote it in 2 weeks and then put it under the bed in a notebook. And that's what I said, I'll get back to that in a second. But I got the attention of one of the biggest agents out there that was with out in Colorado Springs, actually, with one of the big Christian agencies. But what he didn't understand was he thought I was already published. Because I said I've written so many novels, because by that time I started in Philadelphia and then I continued on in Boston. I had written maybe 5 or 6 books. But I didn't tell him I was published. But I just said, in all innocence, I said I've written this book. But he thought I was published. I wasn't published. He said, you know what? You're good. Keep at it. Come back to us when you are published. Now, he was representing Karen Kingsbury at the time. If you know who Karen Kingsbury is, she was called the greatest Christian romance writer of all time by Time magazine. So I thought, I must have something okay. But what I did was I put my writing on the back burner, and I felt like that was the time that I needed to be raising my children. That was the time that I needed to invest myself in those children. And if that desire was still there, and if the Lord wanted me to be published, I would be published eventually. So I put it on the back burner. Like I said, Awakening was my first book. I put it on the back burner, but I put it under, I printed everything out, put them in notebooks, put them under the bed. So when we moved here in 2005, going back to that, I said, I think I can do this. And so I pulled out some of these notebooks from under the bed of my manuscripts. Well, at the time, series books, especially in Christian romance, series books were becoming, like you'd write 3 or more in the same series, the same group of people, the same people, what have you. And I thought, which one of these manuscripts would be good? So Awakening was it, because it's a group of missionary-minded people from all walks of life that go to different locations and they minister to the Lord together. And Sam was the leader, and I'll tell you about Alexa's the reluctant volunteer who goes along on their first mission to San Antonio in Texas. But I pulled it out and I thought, okay, Awakening, but I only had half of that book under the bed. I thought, oh no, where's the other half of it? I thought I printed it out and couldn't find it. You just have to understand that I was busy with kids. I was a pastor. At that time I was a pastor's wife in Boston. I just stuck it under the bed. I didn't forget about it, but I just, that was it. So I said, okay, Lord, I think this could be a series, because I could take Sam and Lexa would be the first book. He's the leader of this missionary-minded group. He would have his romance in the first book, and then the people that come and help them in their teamwork. It's called teamwork, T-E-A-M, capital W-O-R-K, one word, teamwork. And I could branch out in each of these other books, however many there will be. I can have the romance of the other characters that are in this first book, and so on and so forth. But I only had that half of the manuscript. So I started praying to the Lord, and I said, okay. I had, at that time, remember those old little floppy disks? You had the big ones, you had the little ones, the harder ones. I had those little floppy disks. They call them floppy, but they were harder disks. What, a little 3.5 or 5 or something like that. Well, the best computer that I had, I tried at home to bring, I found one that said Sam and Lexa. So that was Awakening, my first book. And so I thought, okay. And it just, at home it said, can't be read, can't be read, can't be read. They're antiquated, right? So I took them to work, and they had a computer at work that could read these old discs. But I tried it there, and it said, can't be read, can't be read. So, but I kept praying. I said, Lord, if this, I just thought that was the one. The Lord was telling me He wanted me to try to pursue for my first novel to be published. If it was going to happen, it was going to be that book. And so I kept trying, and finally one day at work, and I had done this, I don't know how, probably a couple of months, but I finally put that disc back in at work at this one computer. They said, if anything's going to do it, it's going to be this one, but he's the one who did it. But anyway, I'm sitting there, and I'm just like, okay, Lord. I put it in, and I expected it to say, can't be read, like it had every other time. But that time, I kind of half closed my eyes, and I looked up, and something was different. I heard it doing, it used to do that churning noise. Remember the churning noise? Well, it did something different, and it clicked, and I looked up, and it said, do you want to read this in text only? And I said, I'll read it in any way I get it. And so I printed it, I saved it, I emailed it myself. I got that book back, but what was interesting was when I printed it out, took it home, I had one half of it under the bed, remember? And I pulled it out. What I printed out at work was the other half. It wasn't the first half, it was the other half, and it matched up seamlessly. What I had at home and what I printed out at work, it was the same thing. So I thought, okay, Lord, and I have to tell you this other one thing, this is great. Sam loves peaches, okay? My core character in this whole book series, which ended up being 12, technically 13 books. I did the prequel to it. But Sam loves peaches. That's just his thing, my core character. Well, I was working on Awakening before it was ever published. I was working on it in my office, and I worked in a big law office again. And I went and I got in the elevator to go down and get a bite to eat. Well, one of the attorneys and his client, they were in the elevator. And you just have to hear, I'm not aggressive, I'm assertive. But the client in the elevator, he sounded just like the actor Nicolas Cage. We all know who Nicolas Cage is, right? He has a very distinctive voice. He has a very distinctive laugh. And I told this man, I said, I have to tell you, if I closed my eyes, I would think that I was in this elevator with Nicolas Cage. Well, he laughed, and he just said, I hear that all the time. And I said, it's uncanny. So I said, do you mind when we get off the elevator, my friends are waiting for me to have lunch, could you just say something to them so that they can hear your voice? It was that uncanny. And so we got off the elevator, and the man was, and my friends were there. And I said, you gotta listen to this guy. He said, I don't know. And I said, just say something. He said, what do you want me to say? I said, anything you want. Well, anyway, this guy, remember I said what I just said about Sam, right? And he loves peaches. This guy, he opened his arms, spread his legs apart, opened his arms, and he goes, peaches. Think about it. Of all the words in the English language, the man could have said, peaches. Now that to me was a sign. I'd never been a big believer in signs, big signs from the Lord, at least in my life. But I thought that's a pretty big sign, or a confirmation at that point, that was the book that I was meant to try to get published. And I have other stories, we won't get into the other books in the series, but what I did was I realized, I got laid off from the one job. My one attorney left to go to Jacksonville, and there was not enough work, so I was laid off. It was over the Christmas season, and they gave me enough of a severance package that I stayed home, stayed in my pajamas, but I used my time wisely. I started sending out. By that time, I had Awakening, I had a query letter, which, does anybody know what a query letter is? Do you all know what that is? They said, well, I learned how to write a good query letter, and I sent out the query letter, and I sent it to a bunch of Christian romance publishers. Well, actually, I tried agents for a while, and that didn't work out, and I thought, you know what, I'm not getting any younger here, so I'm going to look up Christian romance publishers that you don't have to have an agent get published. And I got a whole list of them, but then I started going down systematically through the list. I was looking at websites, and I found out, some of them were defunct, some of them had merged, some of them just didn't publish what I had, that type of thing. And so I ended up sending it out to, I don't know, maybe 20 publishers, something like that. But anyway, for the most part, I got rejected, like Steve was saying about it. I never had anybody tell me what they told you. That's awful.
It's a gift.
That would discourage a lot of writers, but I'm glad you weren't discouraged and you kept going. But there was one publisher, it was a small publisher, and then, the name of them is Torn Veil. And Torn Veil alone, I liked the name, Jim liked the name. We thought, that sounds good. A brand new publisher, they were up in Canada, which, that didn't really present a problem, but they were up in Canada, and they sent me, if I had realized, I looked at it was Mother's Day weekend that I got the email from them. And I saw the email, but I just thought it was another rejection. If I had been smart, I would have noticed there was a paperclip attached to the email. So after I did the laundry, after I did Saturday, after I did all this stuff, I finally went back to it and saw, we want to publish Awakening. Here's a contract. Now, it's not Harvest House. It wasn't, it wasn't Rod Holman. It was a small publisher, a very small publisher, and they were just getting started. But and a lot of my writer friends said, you should have held out for a bigger publisher. But again, the Lord had a plan. The bigger publishers, that's not what I wanted. That wasn't my route. So anyway, they published this book, and it's Awakening. And I used to tell people, I still do, if you look up Awakening on Amazon, look under my name, don't look under the title, or you will get a rude awakening, because there are a lot of awakenings out there. But anyway, this was their version of it, and then later on, they ended up turning the rights over to me after 4 books. And so I redid it, and at that time, see the shiny cover? It says the shiny cover. Shiny covers were in 2010, late 2010 was when they published Awakening. And then later on in when did we go on our first cruise? It was right before Jim and I were going to go on our first cruise ever. And my publisher wrote and said, we're not going to publish anymore. So I had to scramble in about a month to try to keep my reviews on Amazon, to get everything changed over, and in the process they lost about 30 reviews, and I've had a nice Amazon rep once who stayed on the phone with me, and she found the lost reviews for Awakening hidden somewhere in the file for the second book that had come out. It's crazy. But anyway, I can tell that I'm not going to be able to get through all of this, but I wanted to just give you a little bit of background. And forgive me if it's a little scattered, but I've lived all over the country and I've been able to know a lot of people. I've worked my whole life until 2014. August 2014, I was actually able to stop my day job working for attorneys. And I never really thought it would happen because it is very difficult to make a living as a writer. But I prayed to the Lord. And by this time, by 2014, I can't remember how many I had in this. My Lewis Legacy series is the series I will always be known for. No matter what I ever write, I just know that is the series. And I kept saying, Lord, just keep me going until I get that done. I finally finished it. My last book came out in February, and that was finally the last book. It was about an average of one a year because it came out in 2010, late 2010 Awakening, and I added a couple of books along the way, of course. So it ended up being a long series, but that is always the series that I will be known for. I don't know, but I was given the rights back to my books. It was, I think it was 2012. It was 2010, because I put out the first one. It was 2012, 2013, but the publisher said, I'm not going to publish anymore. Actually, he admitted to me that my books had done a lot better than he ever expected, and it was a lot of work, and he wouldn't do it. So he gave the rights back to me. And so it was worth it because it was actually the best thing that ever happened to me. Was pushing me into the independent waters. Because I was able to, if anybody heard of BookBub? Steve, you have? BookBub is like if you forgive me for saying, the mother of all advertisers for writers. And they put out an email every day. They have different genres. They have all the different genres. It's not just a Christian thing. But they will put out emails. And I was able to get my book, Awakening, and I gave it away free because I had 4 at that time. I gave away Awakening free. And when you give away a book free and it's on BookBub, it was like I was sitting there watching, I'm not a gambler at all, but it was like I was sitting watching a slot machine, in my office at work. I was sitting on my lunch hour and looking, and it was just like the numbers were changing, how fast people were downloading Awakening. So that really jump-started my career. I should tell you though that I have 5 books with another it's more actually a mid-sized Christian romance publisher. I do have 5 books with them. I had a very successful Christmas series called the Starlight Christmas Series. And then I also wrote a book for them, a separate one called Echoes of Edinburgh, set in Scotland. And so I did write that too. And I still have those because they unbelievably have a 10-year contract. Most publishers don't have a contract that long. And the first of the Christmas books came up to get the rights back, but they are playing hardball with me, and they want to keep the rights to all of them for now. And that's another whole story. But anyway, pushing me into the indie waters was really the best thing that first publisher ever did for me. And I highly recommend it. I'm not a control freak, but when you're an independent publisher, you can do everything on your own schedule. You can release when you want, you can do your own book cover, you have your own deadlines, you can just do whatever. And so that's why so many people are independent publishing. It's a mixed blessing because there are a lot of books out there that really shouldn't be published or they're not ready to be published. So I think what I want to tell you is just, pray every time. This is one of the most important things I've learned about writing fiction, is that pray every time that you sit down to write, wherever you write and create. Just ask the Lord to guide your words for His glory, not yours. I've always said, Lord, if I can touch one heart for Christ with my writing, then I'll have done my job. And I know I've done it. I have gotten emails from, there was one that really touched my heart. It was from a missionary in a country. She couldn't even tell me where she was. And she said they're not allowed to read Christian books. But she was able to read my books, and she'd read them in secret or, night, maybe under the covers of the flashlight, I don't know. But she was able to read my books, and what a blessing they had been to her, and what a beacon of hope. I do put scripture in my books. A lot of my tagline is keeping Christ in Christian romance, because Christian romance, you can find everything out there. You find fluff, you find, I would say it's not too much of an exaggeration to say that Christ is being taken out of most of Christian romance. He was there for a while, but now the Christian publishers have, for the most part, been bought out by the big secular publishers. And because of that, they're taking Christ out of a lot of the Christian romance. And I think that's a tragedy, because why do we write? I mean, to me, I write Christian romance because love, everybody loves a good love story, and it all started out with God, didn't it? God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. And so that's what, love's based on. I don't write, if I hear the word, I don't use the word tingle, okay? There are other words I don't use either. But I don't like it when Christian romance writers talk about the tingles and the shivers and it drives me crazy. I do a lot of the old witty banter that used to be in the old movies, like the Cary Grant, the Audrey Hepburn, and I love that witty banter that draws people together, and the conversations, and that draws couples together. But then they also have to go through the hard parts, of course. But they work together. So many books, they break them apart in romances, and they stay apart till the very end, and then they kiss and say, "Oh, I love you, I've loved you all along," and then they grab, and then they go off in the sunset together. I don't do that. I have them working through problems together. That's what I did with Lexa and Sam and Awakening. It took me over a year to get a review, one review on Awakening. Nobody knew who I was. My publisher was new. But finally, it caught on. I call it the little engine that could. Finally, it caught on, and it just went crazy. Now, you know what, Steve, I don't know if you've noticed this. You know what Amazon's done recently, though? Amazon is just, you never know what they're going to do, put it that way. But they are unfortunately, they're the website that sells most of the books. Have you heard what they've done recently? I woke up on, was it Sunday? I don't check my reviews every day by any means, but I happen to see them if I'm looking at my newest book. I often see them, but they have dumped hundreds, sometimes thousands of reviews that we didn't know we had. And I think what they've done is Amazon now owns Goodreads. And I think that they have merged the Goodreads reviews in with Amazon. Which, if you give away a book free, or if you're a Christian, Goodreads is hard on Christian authors. I had a book, one of the Christmas books that I had, before it ever came out, and only my editor, me, and a senior editor had seen that book. Somebody put a 1-star on it on Goodreads without any review. They hadn't read it, but because they see it's a Christian book, they will put a 1-star. And that's what we have to, I knew that the slings and the arrows would come at me as a Christian writer, and they have, but for the most part I've been, I don't want to say protected, but the Lord gives me the desire just to keep going. I might get upset for a day or two if when I got my first 1-star review, it was like, oh, but I was fine. I was fine in a day or two, and somebody said, "Oh, welcome to the club." One of the other authors. They're so encouraging. Authors are a great group. They're a great group to encourage one another. But so, going back to the most important things, the only way to get published is to write. Keep writing. Okay. I go into a little bit about the voice in your writing. Now, that can also be in nonfiction as well as fiction. It's how you say things. It's how you say things, and you can. If you're writing fiction, you can put yourself in there, but you have to be careful of author intrusion. What's it called? You don't want people to think, okay, this is the author. You want to keep it true to your characters. But I won't go into all that at the moment. But your tone is important. You can break the rules. Everybody know what the rules are? Every place has rules, right? Everything has rules. It seems like, well, the rules in writing change quite frequently. When I first started out, the rule was no adverbs. Oh, you don't put any adverbs in there. Well, sometimes you need a good adverb, right? It's not a terrible thing to put an adverb in there. You just don't need to put them in constantly. When I look back at that original manuscript for Awakening, I was the queen of adverbs. It was awful. I had an adverb probably to a sentence or it was not good. So I learned how to take those out. I learned how to tighten up my writing. A lot of what I've learned has been self-taught as far as the fiction writing. I did go to a lot of conferences early on. I did, I did some exchanging of manuscripts with people, that type of thing. But I feel like, the Lord led me through it, and I kept at it. And usually you get better as you keep doing things. Well, I felt like I got better and better at this. And so I felt confident in going into the self-publishing that I could do it. with a little help, but I could pretty much do it without an editor and a senior editor and all this. So I got more confidence. So all the books actually that I publish now are just indie published, self-published. But I am making a living at it. I'm not making as much as I did for a while. There were a lot of people that were taking advantage of the system on Amazon when they introduced the Kindle Unlimited, which is the borrowing program, if you're familiar with that, where you can borrow up to 10 books or so and then at a time, and then you pay a certain fee a month to do that on Amazon, and then you return the book if you want another one, if you reach your limit. But I make more of my money from Kindle Unlimited, actually, with fiction than I do with book sales. And I have so many books that I need to do the actual physical paperback for now. But as Steve said, what was you saying about 40 cents a book?
Yeah, it was bad back in the day.
Yeah, and it's just as bad, to tell you the truth. There's nothing like getting that first book and holding it in your hands. That's your book, baby. That's a special moment. I'm sure you know, Steve. It was just the most wonderful thing, besides having my children, getting married, having children, holding that first book. Like, I did it. And my dad always thought that I could write, and he always wanted me to publish. He always wanted me to move back to Indiana, and he didn't get to see me do any of those things, but I like to think that he knows. Now, my mother, on the other hand, she was the one who said, "Can I edit your book for you?" She was an avid reader, and she was a love. But also, you can break the rules, though, okay? And this is one thing that Colleen Coble, if any of you have heard of Colleen Coble, she lives in Indiana. She writes suspense, Christian suspense. She's very popular. But she said, always write a scene or a chapter this is for fiction, from the point of view of the character who has the most to lose. And that's a very important point. And that has worked. If you write fiction, or if you try to write fiction, try doing that. Would you agree, Steve?
That's excellent advice.
Yeah, that is excellent advice. And as you said, I have on here, write what you know and what you don't know. Research. I wrote a book about a NASA shuttle commander. You don't see that in Christian romance. But I went to Johnson Space Center in Houston. It, of course, coincided with a Christian conference, the big ACFW, the American Christian Fiction Writers. And it was our 25th anniversary, was it? Yeah, a trip, a little bit delayed. But we went, and I went to Johnson Space Center. It happened to be I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday morning. It was rainy before the school kids got there. I ran around Johnson Space Center. I asked questions of everybody I could find. I asked them in the gift shop, asked them in the cafeteria. We went to show us the mission control. I asked them questions because I had drafted this book up a number of years ago about the shuttle commander, and I was asked, okay, how tall do they have to be, and this is his name, this is his background, and this and that and the other, and I got the best feedback from these people, John. Most people love to answer your questions. Most people love to tell you from their great wealth of knowledge what they've done and how they can help you, and but you have to ask. You have to reach out and ask. But I thought, nobody's done, that I know, has done a Christian romance about a shuttle commander. When I started writing this first series, I had in the back of my mind that I wanted to write a book about a shuttle commander. Well, the shuttle program was supposed to end in 2010. I think it ended up going until maybe 2011 or something. But anyway, so I backdated this series. And some people call it historical. Awakening started in 97. The book ends in 1998. Some people consider that historical. But I knew that I wanted to write about that shuttle commander. So the whole series is backdated a little bit. So that you start in 1997. And the one that just finished is actually, the series just finished. It ends in 2015. But now I'm going to do the love stories of kids called the Lewis Ayres series, and people are already wanting that. So anyway, which is nice to have readers. It's nice to have faithful readers. I know Dave's mother loved my books, and your dad just told me the sweetest thing today about that. But also, they have something, I don't know, Steve, if you were referring to the Christian Writers Market Guide, that's something that I would recommend for all Christian writers. Fiction, nonfiction, greeting cards, no matter what you want to write. If it's in the Christian realm, I would advise buying that. They used to come with disc. I don't know if they have them anymore. I don't even know. I know that I saw it's paperback. It's available in paperback. And I would advise you to get that. If you need direction on publishers to contact or agents, that type of thing, if you should go that route. I don't want to discourage anyone from trying to get an agent and trying to get a bigger publisher. But I'm just telling you what worked for me in my experiences, and that the market has changed dramatically in recent years. I know a lot of agents are scrambling, and they're worried more or less about the future of the industry as far as traditional publishing. Make your work the best it can be before you send it out to anyone, agents, publishers, whoever. Most publishers have specifications for what they want to see in unsolicited manuscripts, so the query letters I mentioned before. Let's see here. You don't need an agent. You picked up a lot of my points here, Steve, so we're thinking alike. You don't need to have an agent to be published today. You don't need a publisher other than you to be published. Did you know, though, that you can actually just upload a Word document into Amazon? It's that easy. You don't have to be technical. You don't have to be some whiz at all this stuff. And I feel like there are a lot of writers who know so much more than I do about the technical parts of it, but I know how to write my books. I know how to get them on Amazon and have them sell. And it's a very, very easy process. And I know that Amazon, one of the best things they do is they walk you through things. Now, covers are important. And actually, I have started a little side business of designing book covers. And I use Canva, but I don't use the AI. Actually, I think that's new for Canva. I actually played around yesterday with Canva because you can put a flower in somebody's hand on a cover, or you can do things. I tried to change the color of a dress. What sort of worked, it sort of didn't. But I've always loved the creative process. I come from a family of photographers. I love the creativity of just everything. But it's a nice change from writing books to be able to design and draw upon those talents to design book covers. So I started doing that about a month ago, and I've made more the last month on my book covers than I did probably the last 2 months of writing. Because they're cheap. I price them cheap because I'm starting out. I noticed one designer yesterday charged $899 for a series of 3 book covers for Christian romance. You know what I charge? $40 a cover, or 3 for $100. So that's a bargain. But I think mine are very pretty and they've caught on, so I'm excited. But I only sell covers for the sweet and clean, the inspirational, or what I would consider for Christian romance. But I've enjoyed that. So if you have something other than writing that you like to do, there's always a need out there for editors. There's always a need for book designers. I don't know, I hope this AI doesn't take over too much, because it scares me a little bit about the writing. Because computers and these things, they can't duplicate the human heart or soul. They cannot put the time and effort I put into these books. But anyway, it's interesting, but it's kind of scary. So let's see here. Anybody have any questions? Because I know I need to wrap it up here, and there were a lot of things I wanted to tell you. I didn't get to tell you, of course, and that's just the way it goes. But writers love to talk about writing. Yes?
And of course, like you said, my mom had all your books, because she likes them.
The ones that were in paperback.
Well, that's where that question goes. You're mostly doing books that are online, and people don't hold them.
Right. Well, they're a lot cheaper. I mean, I do charge $5.99. My last book, though, in this series, it was almost 600 pages. My books have a tendency to get longer. When I started out, I think Awakening's the shortest one of the series, but I do want to eventually do them. It's just that I'd rather be writing. That's my bumper sticker. And I was paying out so much money to people, other people to be able to format the books and to be able to do the cover, the full cover. I had the ebook cover, but to format the paperback cover, that's a whole new world. And I have to take the time to do it. And I understand Amazon's made it much simpler, so I'm going to try to do it.
You find that the world doesn't hold books anymore?
Well, what's interesting is that I sell a lot more ebooks, and I do a lot with the Kindle Unlimited. But whenever I meet people in person, what do you think they say? Oh, I want to hold a book. I like a book. But I'm a one-woman show at this point, and I can't do it all. And I would love to do it all, but I just, I go, where the Lord leads, and He hasn't led me in the wrong direction. He's opened every door that I've needed. When I mentioned I left the law firm in 2014, there was really no way I could do. I was making a good living with the books, but I thought, okay, Lord, I need security. Most people do. They need that security of knowing that they're going to have a steady paycheck coming in. And even though I had money, I didn't know from one month to the next, depending on whether I had a new book out, how much I was going to make. And the thing, too, about independent publishing, though, is that money comes directly into your bank account every month. And you don't have to go through an agent. You don't have to go through a publisher, that kind of thing. But anyway, there's so many different things involved with producing these books. But just trust in the Lord, keep going if it's your passion, just keep going, keep learning, keep doing, and you'll get there. Okay, who else? Did that answer?
Well, both of you and Steve had an educational background and started with college education.
But again, it's just the basics. It really, fiction writing is a whole different.
Your education contributed to what you're able to do writing-wise?
It did. I mean, like I said, it gave me the basics, the mechanics of writing, and you can't ever discount that. You can't, and I know that it did. It was great.
How do those of us that don't have an educational background?
What, in writing, you mean? I know you have a background that I would envy too, in a way, because I would love to fly jets. I would love to.
I teach you how to fly, but I can't teach you how to write a book. And
I just
some
need
of us-
you to
Some
buy.
of us want to write books who have a different, don't have that kind of a background. What should we do?
Don't let it stop you. I mean, you just have to sit down and write. That's the best advice I can give you, is just to sit down and start writing, see where the Lord leads. If you have an idea for a book, just sit down and start writing. That's the only way you're going to get there eventually, is to write. I will say I have never had writer's block. Never. Because I used to stay up when I worked at the law firm. I would write from like 11 p.m. when the kids were supposed to be in bed. I would write till 11. But actually, when we moved here, our kids were older. Our 2 daughters, we have 3 kids. Our daughters were older, and Matthew was still, I think, well, he was in grade school, but they were, he was in bed, and so I was able to sit down and write pretty much unimpeded, like at 11 p.m. And it's funny because I always have the TV on in the background, just something, some old comedy or something, just for background noise. I don't need all quiet. I either want music or headphones, or but it was funny, whenever Frasier came on, which is 2 a.m., I'd turn it off. That was just my cutting off point. I made myself go to bed. And that was at 2 o'clock, and I would get up about 6:30 or 7, and I'd get ready to go to work. I had a lot more energy then than I do now, but, it worked. It worked. And if that drive and desire is there, and the Lord puts that, passion into your heart, you'll make it work. You'll find the time. Weekends, Jim will tell you, I'm just constantly at it. I finish one book, and people say, "Oh, so what are you going to do with all your time?" I'm like, "Are you kidding? I've already started on the next one." Or now I'm doing the book covers. The book covers. I give on this sheet. I have personal and professional ways to make your work visible, and there's just suggestions on what you can do. I've got my business cards here if anybody would like them. I've got a few books. I didn't really bring books to sell, but if you want to look at them and see any you're interested in. I did write one called Second Time Around, which is the book after Awakening, and it's based on the Christian couple the newlyweds who had an accident. She lost her memory, and he had to court her all over again. It became the Hollywood movie The Vow, which was a great big hit with secular actors, of course, and what people told me after reading Second Time Around is that's the movie that The Vow, that's what The Vow should have been. It should have been this Christian story, because the real life story is a Christian couple who said the Lord kept them together. And that's what happens in this book. But he almost loses, he had a hard time in this book, Mark, getting her attention in the first place. She didn't like him at all. But then when he finally got her attention and married her, then she falls down steps, in this old home in Massachusetts, which is modeled after the home we lived in, the parsonage we lived in Massachusetts. There's a lot of me in my books. There's a lot of us in the books. But a man in our church read Second Time Around. He said, "I want to read one of your books." Well, you're not a man in the choir, so I want to read one of your books. I did. Which one should I read? And by that time I had maybe 6 or 7 in this particular series, plus others, and I said, "You need to read Second Time Around." Because I knew he was an avid golfer, and this is Mark, the guy in the book. He owned a sports advertising agency. His dad was a Boston Celtic who died of a brain tumor. He didn't know his dad well. Mark was forced to be the man in the family for his wife, his mother and his sister, and he was a AAA ball player for the Boston Red Sox, but that didn't pan out. He was very smart, but he was kind of arrogant, kind of brash, new Christian at the beginning of Second Time Around, fairly new Christian, a few years ago. But it's about him winning his wife all over again and having just, Second Time Around. Now, I've seen several books since with the title Second Time Around. There's a consignment shop in our town called Second Time Around, but it fits that book perfectly. Just as Awakening, the title fits that book perfectly. It's, it's a spiritual awakening. It's all kinds of awakenings, but not that kind. It's published on Amazon. But anyway, Facebook page, as Steve mentioned too, there's other social media sites. You can develop a reader's team if you have a book to sell. You can go on Facebook and say, I'm looking, there are writers groups, and you can look for Christian writers groups and say, I've got this book I want to sell. Anybody willing to read it for, and give a review on Amazon, that type of thing. There's ad placements I give on here. Faithful Reads is one that is good for all genres of Christian, fiction, nonfiction, both. So, just there's any number of things you can do. Be creative. When I first started out with Awakening, I sent out a postcard of the first, well actually, when I had the first 3 books in the series, I made a postcard through, what's the name of Vistaprint. I had a postcard made up with the first 3 book covers. I sent it to a lot of Houston, basically Baptist churches, evangelical churches, and I said, you know, I've written these books, could you please pass this on to the leader of your women's ministry? That type of thing. And so I know it brought me readers. But you just be creative, just do things, target your audience, that type of thing. I think there's a reason that I had the advertising sequenced in college with journalism, because who better, the advertising comes into play with the book covers, it comes into play with some of the ideas I've been given. I got into the CBD catalog, everyone knows, the Christian Book Distributors. We were right down the road from them when we lived in Boston, and we used to go down to the big sales. But you really only got in their catalog if you were a big, big publisher author. Well, I was determined I was going to get in the CBD catalog, and I did. You know how I did it? Anybody have any ideas? Well, the information's right out there. The information is there. Who owned the company? Okay, it's on the CBD website. Who owns the company? The 2 brothers that started it in the basement, the garage of their parents' house. Well, I looked them up. I worked at a law firm, but I don't think that helped me particularly. I looked it up. I saw where these brothers lived. I sent Awakening to one of these brothers. I sent it was UPS, overnight. I sent it to him, I said, hey, could you please just give this to your wife, your mother, your sister, your daughter, anybody who might be into one of these founders of CBD? That took a lot of guts, but hey, I did. But anyway, he wrote to me, and he wrote a beautiful letter. I should have framed it, actually, because, I should have framed it. It's got coffee on it now. I don't know. I should have framed it, but he says, we tried to contact your publisher to see if we could get Awakening in our magazine, but he never responded. Well, but anyway, he said, I'll be happy to put Awakening in our catalog. So it was there for maybe two catalogs, but it was there. It was there. Because it was considered traditionally published. It was with small publishers. So again, I haven't had a big publisher, but I've had a small publisher, but I had the little book that could. Took over a year to get a review, and yet it caught on. And now Amazon, it still for years only had 350 some odd reviews. 387, got up to 387, and now with Amazon, what they've done in dumping all the good reviews, it now has 850 something. They dumped 500 reviews. And of course, Awakening stayed the same, the 4th book of the series stayed the same, but some of them are going down. Now some people say it's only the Christian authors that they're doing this with. I don't know if that's the case or not, and I don't care. But the book is getting out there to people, and the Lord has fulfilled my wish that, that I know that they're touching hearts. I know that these books are getting through to people. And again, I do use scripture. I had my last book, I had probably 3 to 4 Kindle pages of scriptures. That they're at the back of the book. They're referenced in the book. Very rarely is it verbatim, because most people don't go around spouting verbatim the Bible verses, but they will allude to them. They will talk about them or say, as the Lord says, as the Word says, as the Bible says, that type of thing. So I do use that because I do write about Christian characters. And I think more Christian romance writers should. They should put it in there, but they don't, but that's just my thing. But I do. As for me and my house, I'm going to put the Lord in my books. I'm going to keep Christ in my romance. That's the way. That's what He wants me to do. That's my passion. That's my calling. So that's what I do. I'm sorry if I'm a little bit overday. I hope I made some kind of sense. Anyway, thank you. I didn't get a chance.
Thank you. We started off with one of our own, Pastor Steve. I wanted to introduce you to someone who's actually made a living doing this. The next session is going to be with, and I don't want to be insulting by calling you wannabes. Most of us are wannabes. We don't do it professionally. We've ventured out into that dangerous, scary water of can I? And we're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Let's take a 5-minute break if we can. It's 11 o'clock. We'll be back about 11:05. We'll start the next session. Thank you, JoAnn. God bless you.
Thank you.
Morning, how you doing? I'm good.
Yeah, it's nice. I don't want to have to hang on to your business. It's polished, but if you know,
Yeah, that's the best thing that can happen to us, stay cloudy and rainy.
Hers are very dramatic. Mine are like, but oh, you like that? Yeah. I haven't read the only one that's actually really considered a purpose, but it's 1962. So that's not I know what you mean.
Oh, yeah, we inspired you to try to do that? Okay.
I can't even speak, let alone write.
It isn't for everybody.